Continue our Gemara on Pei Amud Beis 80b. Where we left off, we substantiated this idea that one is not satisfied, one's mind is set at ease from hunger, having eaten exactly the size of a large date, irrespective of what kind of food and irrespective of how big the person might be. There's a universal standard for eating, and for drinking, there is a subjective standard, but the subjective standard is somewhat universal also. And I thought, as if I'm a thirstier kind of guy, so I need 2 cups of water, and you're a less thirsty kind of person, you need half a cup of water. Every person is exactly their half a mouthful. So it is subjective, unlike the eating, but it's still somewhat universal. It's not left to estimation, even though it's subjective to each individual's experience. It's not left to their individual subjective feeling about how they like to drink water. And of course, as we keep on stressing, this is all only for a question of culpability. In terms of permissibility, it is forbidden to eat or drink any amount. Okay, so we are about third or quarter from the bottom of the page, 2 dots, and then it says Kol ha'oichlin, and then again 2 dots. We're on Pei Amud Beis 80b. Have it? Okay, so the Mishnah told us that all food, Kol ha'oichlin, all food combine if it's eaten within that time frame. Kedei achilas pras, if it's eaten within that time frame of how much it takes to eat a meal, which is a half a loaf, which is 4 eggs, that amount of time. Any food eaten in that amount of time combines to reach the kaiseves, the size of the date, for culpability. Whereas food and drink do not combine. Something we talked about yesterday, and it's something the Mishnah, the Gemara mentioned at the beginning, that food and drink don't combine to make the correct amount. Because drink has its measure, half a mouthful, and food has its measure, the size of a large date. And the two don't combine. Even if you've ate and drank them within the time frame, and together they would make more than both of the amounts, if they are each individually less than their individual measures, then one is not culpable. Okay. That's the framework in which the next Gemara is going to be taught. Amar Papa said, Achal unsa, if someone ate meat, umilcha, and salt with the meat, mitzvah if they combine. Even though salt, in and of itself, is not a food, so it's not something that someone eats. Someone does not eat salt on its own. Nonetheless, kivan de achli inchi, because people do eat meat with their salt, mitzdarfin, it combines to make that amount. So say the person's meat, this piece of meat the person's eating, is exactly, a fraction less than the size of a large date. And then with the salt, it pushed it over the edge. The Papa is teaching us that it's culpable, even though the salt in and of itself isn't an edible food, but combined with meat, it is edible. And because combined with meat, it is edible, and it's ordinarily eaten that way, then it combines to make the full amount. So this is true of any condiment, any salt, spice, herb that one would eat together with any kind of food, even if one wouldn't eat it individually, but because it's eaten with that food, combined. Yeah, mustard, or even, black peppercorn that you would eat on a salmon. But you're not going to eat it alone. Nonetheless, that little bit makes it bigger now. Now it might reach the culpability size, the size of a large date. Shlaka stated, taking this same logic a step further. Seer, brine, which is brine is like a densely salted water. Shalgabe yerek, which is on vegetables, which was apparently a thing back then. They used to, I guess you could say it's kind of pickled vegetables. Okay, I didn't think of it that way. I was thinking Yeah, I guess it's pickle juice. I guess you could think of it as pickle juice, yeah. Or a salad dressing, yeah. Yeah, I was actually thinking of it. I was thinking in the terms of like what they used to eat. They used to boil vegetables. They had all kinds of techniques to preserve food as long as possible. So they used to boil vegetables and almost to the point that the vegetable dissolved. But that would be shluckers. That's not this. Yeah, this is a dip, any kind of dip, yeah. But a dip is already a solid. This is a liquid, specifically a liquid. A brine is a salted liquid, yeah, but I don't know why I was thinking in terms of that dish. I guess you're right. It's more like pickle juice or any sea, any, you dip the carpus in salt water. Yeah, but any liquid dressing. So mitzdarif, they combine the kaseves to reach the amount of culpability the size of a large date. But Yom Kippur among Yom Kippur. The Gemara asks, this is obvious. I mean, you already told us that any condiments to food combine with the food to make the size larger, even though it isn't eaten independently. No one's drinking pickle juice, or no one's drinking a salad dressing. Says the Gemara, no. Here is what Reish Lakish is teaching us that our Papa did not. The time I might have thought mashkahu, this dressing is a liquid, and we already stated that liquids do not combine with food. Therefore, Kamash Malan, therefore Reish Lakish comes and teaches us, Kol achshuri uchla, anything that is achshuri means like a preparation for, but anything that is in the context of eating, uchlahu is also considered a food, even though it's technically a liquid. So the salad dressing is technically a liquid, but nonetheless, because it's part of your eating rather than your drinking, it combines with the food to make it larger than the amount of culpability. Correct. But soup, even though you say you're eating soup, it's a liquid that's eaten on and of itself. So it wouldn't combine with anything. I don't think the soup would combine with, I don't think the soup would combine with the croutons in it. If anything, you might say the reverse. I don't know that this is the halacha. When we get to the Shulchan Aruch, we'll see, but I'm just thinking out loud now, it would seem the reverse. Because soup is eaten in and of itself. And if you had croutons in there, the croutons are only there to augment your soup experience. In the same way this dressing is here to augment your salad. No? Seems logical to me. But we'll see when we look at the Shulchan Aruch, I guess we'll have a better understanding. But it would seem logical to me. I don't know. Like why doesn't this logic work in the reverse? The question is it eaten on its own, and what's augmenting what? Wouldn't that be the logic? What do you think? Sorry? Soup is considered a solid? It's a liquid. So what? You just happen to be drinking it through in scoops of spoons, but why is it considered eating? We only consider eating. Sure it is. A chicken soup. A chicken soup is not like a pasted, not like a cream soup or something. It's broth. It's chicken broth. Even though in English we say you're eating it because you're using a spoon, I don't think that halachically that would be considered eating. So if you had mandalach, what you call in Yiddish, or croutons in your chicken broth soup, I don't think that would be considered a food. I think it would be considered a liquid. No, we'll have to wait for the Shulchan Aruch and see. But I'm putting my chips down on it being liquid. If you don't have to chew it, I don't know. It's a good question. How do you define liquid? Usually the halacha is that if you poured it out of a cup, does it spill out or not? So like if you took a thick cream soup and you tilted it like that, it wouldn't spill out. It would drop out, right? Whereas if you took a chicken broth, it would spill out just like a water or wine did, right? That's usually what liquid means. When they talk about like pureeing stuff, like for example, brachas, and the laws of blessing, they talk about whether it's a liquid or a food. They talk about whether or not does it drip like a liquid, or does it fall like a food? I would put my chips down that chicken broth is a liquid, and I would even go so far as to say the logic here goes the reverse. That if you had mandalach in your soup, it would combine with the soup to make it bigger, just like the liquid here combines with the salad to make the salad bigger, even though the dressing is a liquid. well, again, reserve any halachic ruling for the Shulchan Aruch, which we'll, God willing, do tomorrow. But that's where that's how it would seem logical to me at the moment. But I guess we'll learn and we'll see. Okay. Further stated, Amar Shlakish says, "Oichel achila gasa," one who eats literally like achila gasa means like almost like a repulsive kind of eating. Yom Kippur, when Yom Kippur, potter, they're exempt. How would you have a repulsive kind of eating? So Rashi explains for us. A person ate a full meal just before Yom Kippur started at the Sudam of Sekes, and he's completely full. And then within minutes after Yom Kippur starts, he eats again. Not because he's hungry, and it's not at all healthy for him. In no ways is beneficial for him. He's just stuffing himself because he wants to. So potter is exempt, even though it is forbidden, of course. But nonetheless, the punishment is only for a proper eating. And this is not a proper eating. Or at least some eating that has some benefit to you. This is just obnoxious. A similar kind of concept, yeah. A similar concept. The rules around that are very particular, but the general concept is correct. So the Gemara explains, how do we derive this in the verse? My time, what's the reason? Because when the verse delineates culpability for Yom Kippur, meaning there are places where the Torah says not to eat, and then there's another verse where the Torah says punishment. So you can see it's number 2 there. So you look at, I don't know if the numbers on your pages might be a little different. But for me, it says here number 2, it says, any person that shall not inflict the pain upon himself on this very day, he will be excised, he'll get kares. That's the culpability. So the verse says, back to the Gemara here, my time was the reason, the punishment is for one who, quote, does not inflict pain upon himself. Prat, that's the exclusion of lamazik, one who damages himself. In other words, the verse says, if you don't inflict pain, you are culpable, which means if not inflicting pain means you did something to your satisfaction. And that's when you're culpable. Whereas this person stuffing himself is damaging himself, and thus forbidden, but not culpable. It says in the name of Rish Lakish. Zar, on a similar vein. Zar, a foreigner, literally, someone who's not a kohen. Zar means a foreigner, and depending on the context, you're foreign to what? In this context, you're foreign to eating truma, because you're not a kohen. So Zar, a ordinary Jew, a non-kohen, she'achal truma, which ate of truma, which is food dedicated just for the kohen. And achila gasa, he ate it in, again, this repulsive, obnoxious manner. He stuffed himself, he had a full meal, and then eats truma from the kohen. So, first of all, there is mishalim, you have to pay as a keren the cost of that food, because you stole from a kohen. Right? Just like any time you steal, you got to pay back what you've taken. But, ordinarily, a person who eats truma from a kohen, has to pay back the capital, what they took, the value of that food, plus there's a penalty that one has to pay a fifth, a penalty for taking truma, for taking holy food. But this person who ate obnoxiously pays the amount of what the food cost because he stole, but he doesn't pay the penalty. Why? Because the penalty in the verse is written ki yochel, with the verse here on the left, number 3 on my page. I'm not sure what number it is on your page, which says v'ish ki yochel kodesh bishkaga, a person who eats holy food accidentally, and he shall add a fifth to his payment, and he should return the holy to the priest. So he returns the holy, he returns the actual food, and he's got to add, he has to add a fifth. Inadvertently. If it's amazing, it's a different story. So, but the verse here reads, ki yochel, if he eats, implying a proper eating. Prat, this is the exclusion of lamazik, one who damages himself. So just like on Yom Kippur, one who damages himself by eating is not culpable even though it's forbidden. So likewise, one who eats truma accidentally in such a manner that's unhealthy, then they are responsible to pay for what they've taken, but they don't pay the penalty. The penalty is reserved for someone who eats properly. States further on this topic. Zar, a foreigner, a non-kohen, top page, pay aleph, top page 81a. Kohen, Zar, a non-kohen, shekaises sa'irim shaltruma. He chews uncooked, unripe, maybe ripe. but peeled barley, shall truma of truma. Obviously, this is extremely unhealthy. It's exactly animal fodder. Yes, it's exactly animal fodder. So it's unhealthy and kind of obnoxious. So a person who does that, again, Mishalmas Karen, pays for the cost of what they have stolen. But the Mishalmas Chamish does not pay for the penalty of the fifth for the same logic, because the Torah, because the pasuk says Kiyachal, that one who eats properly should pay this penalty, prat, the exclusion of Lamazik, one who damages himself. This person is doing. Now we have one more case, which is even more obnoxious. Yep. What do you say? That's correct. That's correct. The penalty is not about the Kohen receiving extra. It's about the person. It's about penalizing the person for violating. Yes, correct. That's correct. It's more about the person who violated rather than the benefits. That's correct. It's because it doesn't come to him. It happens to come to him. No, it happens to come to him. But what I mean is, he hasn't earned it. It happens. He gets it, but he doesn't earn it. So the fact that he didn't get it, he doesn't lose anything. It's the question of this person getting the penalty that Hashem wants to penalize him for. Okay, now one more case, which is really even more obnoxious. Not for everybody's stomach. I wouldn't imagine it's for most people's stomach. Amar Rav Shizvi said, Amar Bechanan, Nim Rav Bechanan, Zar, a non-Kohen, Shabala, Shezifin Shatrama, who swallowed plums, if I'm not mistaken, of Truma, Vikion, and then the person vomited them. V'achlan acher, and then the remnants of what came out of this person's mouth is now eaten by another person. Yep, I warned you. The first person pays for the full amount of what it costs because he stole, and pays the fifth because he enjoyed himself eating plums. But Sheni, the second person, Ein Mishalim, only pays Eladmei Eitzim, only that which the plum in its current form after coming out of the first guy's mouth, what's it useful for? And the only thing it's useful for is to become wood, whatever pieces of wood there are there. I'm not sure how, but whatever is there, it can be used to kindle a fire. So however much that is worth, that's how much the second guy pays, in addition to the first person, Bilvad alone. Meaning like this, when a person steals, the details of this are very numerous, but the general principle is, if someone steals and then does some sort of change to the item they stole, then they now own that thing. They're responsible to repay the person they took from, and then whatever penalties come along with it, depending on what kind of stealing the situation is, but they essentially end up owning that which they've stolen. So this person who ate the truma stole from the kohen, but now owns the plums. So the second person who now takes it from him, because it came out of him, now stole not from the kohen, but only stole from the first guy. But what did he steal from the first guy, from the first person who ate? All he stole was the usefulness that this person gets out of that. And the only usefulness there is to this vomit, essentially, is to kindle a fire. And thus, all he has to pay is to the first guy to pay for the value of what it would cost to pay for kindling of using that thing. Yeah, what were you going to say? Yep. Well, the vomit of the plums. Yeah. The reason why he doesn't pay the penalty is because he didn't steal from the kohen. He stole from the first. That's correct. He stole from the guy who ate. So the guy who ate it owns it now. So the second guy who took it stole from the. That's correct. Not only no penalty, but he doesn't have to pay for full plums because it's not full plums anymore. Right. So all he has to pay for is for the little bit amount of money, whatever that money is. It's very little, but that's how much that all has to pay. But the key here is that the first guy who ate it owns it now. That's the key point here. So I was just thinking about that. Why does the Gemara use such an extreme example with a guy? I was just thinking about that. Why does the Gemara use such an extreme example with a guy actually eats? Why not just say the guy took it and discarded it? Right, so even if he, so it's a chiddush, even though he ate it, so you might think he has some benefit, so he pays for the whole value. No, because it's so disgusting, all he pays for is, that's a good point. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. In other words, because the eating is such a disgusting version of eating, it doesn't constitute eating. And therefore it doesn't pay for what the eating value of it is, only for the value of discarding it, which is the value of what you could have done, which is to light it. So that's why it keeps in line with the previous statements of something that's disgusting as an eating doesn't get the full penalties of the eating. Okay, good point. That's had it been something to be eaten. That's correct. It doesn't have the full value of what it would be if it were a food that's properly eaten, even though this guy happened to technically eat it. Thank you. That's very correct. Okay, now final few statements on this discussion. And God willing, tomorrow we're going to look at the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law. We'll look at the laws of eating on Yom Kippur. Okay, this is something we mentioned before. The Mishnah says that food and drink does not combine, right? Food has its amount, we eat the size of a date. Drink has its amount, half a mouthful. They don't combine to push someone over the threshold. Gemara asks, Mantana, who is the author of this idea? Who is the Mishnaic scholar, the Tana, who is in favor of this view? Rav Chisda says, the Machlokes Shnoya, it's actually a dispute. The sages and one particular scholar. That is Rabbi Shua. Rabbi Shua hates Rabbi Shua. The Tanan, for we've learned, Klal Amar Rabbi Shua. Rabbi Shua stated the following principle. Okay, so let's follow here because it's a little difficult to keep track. Kol shetu mosai v'shi'urei shava, anything whose impurity and its measure is the same, mitzdaref can combine. So to explain what this means, Rashi gives us examples for all these. You have to look at Rashi on the side. Okay, so let's just say, for example, we're talking about two different elements of impurity. One is, what level of impurity are you? Is this the kind of impurity that renders you impure for 7 days, or 1 day, or 3 days, whatever the number is? Usually it's 7 or 1. So that's one measure. Is this the kind of impurity that makes you impure for 7 days or 1 day? The other thing is, how big does that item have to be to confer impurity? Does it have to be the size of a legume, a lentil? That's correct. I was trying to think which legume it is. It's a lentil, or does it have to be the size of an olive? So if these are two things which both confer the same impurity and they're the same size, then they combine. Rashi gives examples as, for example, two little pieces of a corpse, of a human corpse. They have the same level of impurity because they would both confer impurity for 7 days. But because they're two different corpses, though, but combined, they reach the size of a lentil. On all of them. No, for that, it's for a share. Yeah, size of, oh yeah, right. That's size of an olive. Or if you had two half creepy crawlies, which have obviously the same amount of impurity, which I think is only for 1 day, and they have the same amount of size because they're both creeper crawlies, in which the size is only the size of a lentil, but each individually do not reach the size of a lentil, but together these two little pieces of the sheretz can make it to a lentil. So it says Rabbi Shua they combine. That's a different story. A bone is a different story. And how big the bone is it a singular bone? Is it not a singular bone? Is it a half a bone? Or is it a complete bone? It's a different story. But we're just giving this general principle. Sorry? That's correct. We're talking about flesh here. Yes. The bone's a different story. Sorry? That's what I'm saying. Is it a complete bone or is it not a complete bone? It changes the law. Does it have bone with flesh on it? Also changes the law. But we're making the general principle that if the level of impurity that it confers and the size required to infer that impurity is the same, even if they're different bodies, different pieces of a sheretz, different pieces of an animal, different pieces of a human, they still combine. Yes, correct. Exactly. So this is Rabbi Shua who says that. Different pieces of food combine. That's what Rav Chisda is suggesting. Okay. Unless they're the same. So let's see. Which is like we're watering. That's correct. Let's go through this. Now, if they share the same level of impurity, but v'lo shiurei, they have a different size required for that impurity. So it says Rashi, for example, a creepy crawly, a sheretz, or the corpse of an animal, both of them only confer impurity for one day, but nonetheless, their size is different. The amount required for the creeper crawly is the size of a lentil. The amount required for impurity for an animal, for a dead animal, is an olive. And therefore, even with the same level of impurity, they don't have the same size, and therefore they don't combine. Now, another example, if it's shiuroi, their size is equal, but the loy tumasai, not their level of impurity. So, for example, the corpse of a human and the corpse of an animal, both of them have the same size of impurity in that they confer impurity when they reach the size of an olive, but one, touching a corpse, makes you impure for 7 days. The other one, touching an animal, only for 1 day. Therefore, they don't combine, even though their size is the same. If if they're completely different categories, different size, and different level of impurity, then for sure they don't combine. For example, a sheretz, a creepy crawly, which is only 1 day, and it's the size of a lentil, and a human corpse, which is 7 days and the size of an olive. So that, or human flesh of human corpse. Those do not combine. Aim and staff don't combine. Okay, so all to say that we see from Rabbi Shua that unless they match up exactly in their size and in their culpability and in their level, they don't combine. Therefore, the same thing would be on Yom Kippur. Food and drink have a different, even though they're the same culpability, right? Because they both get kares, they both get the same excision, but they don't have the same size. And because they don't have the same size, they don't combine. Whereas the people, as Rav Chisda says, this is a question of dispute, matter of dispute. So there are sages who disagree with Rabbi Shua. They would not follow with the Mishnah because they might argue the culpability is the same because you get the same same excision. They might argue if they do combine because the punishment's the same. So only Rabbi Shua, which says that everything has to match up, would say in Yom Kippur they don't combine because the sizes are different. Okay. Now, but Rav Nachman says, Afilu Tema, however, I can suggest, says Rav Nachman, you might suggest even Rabbanon. Even with respect to even the sages who disagree with Rabbi Shua, and they say there is combination when they share size, or there is combination when they share level of impurity, even if they're lacking in the same size. Yes, let's just say it's one or the other. But for our purposes, they share level of impurity, but don't share the same size. Nonetheless, they would combine. And yet, these sages would still say that it doesn't combine on Yom Kippur. How so? Because perhaps when the sages say there is no combination when there is different sizes. Is Hasam is over there with respect to impurity. Why? The shame tumma chadhi. Because even if they have different sizes, the spiritual component of what this stuff is attracting is the same. They both get the same impurity. Different sizes, who cares? They share the same spiritual property in that they have the same level of impurity, and thus combined. But in our case, they don't share their elemental factor of what they are. The elementary element of what makes it a violation, they don't share. When it comes to impurity, these two things, say the creeper crawly and the dead animal, they don't share a size, but they share the essential element that makes them a problem. They share the same impurity that lasts for a day, and thus they can combine. But in the case of Yom Kippur, what makes them essentially a problem, they don't share. How so? Because in our case, mishum yisuvi daita. Over here, it's a question of, does what this person consumed satisfy his mind? Does it take the edge off of his hunger? And therefore, v'hai loy misidaita. And therefore, a combination of food and drink do not take off the edge, because my feelings of thirst and my feelings of hunger are separate feelings. So I could take off the edge of my hunger, but I'm still thirsty, or I could take the edge of my thirst and I'm still hungry. So because they don't share a commonality in what makes them a problem, we can't combine them. And therefore, even the sages who would say we do combine them when it comes to impurity because the elemental factor is still shared, here they would say it doesn't combine because the elemental factor is not shared. Because the reason why the food problem is to take care of my hunger, and the drink problem is to take care of my thirst. And they don't overlap. That would seem to be a dispute between Rav Chisda and Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman would say we're looking at the elemental factors, and therefore the sages would say even their sages would agree you can't combine. Whereas Rav Chisda would say, look at the technical factors. And the technical factors are they don't match up in their size, and therefore even the sages would say you can't combine. That would be the dispute between Rav Chisda and Rav Nachman in what the sages would have said. The sages would disagree with Rabbi Shua. Sorry? The sages would say it doesn't combine. The sages would say it does combine Yom Kippur, yes. Because either they would say it does combine like Rav Chisda because the technical factors match up, right? Both Yom Kippur and Tumah. Whereas Rav Nachman would split it and say, don't look at the technical factors, look at the elemental factors. Size, the size, or they both have the same punishment. They both have the same culpability. Same culpability, same thing, so they can combine. Whereas Rav Nachman would say, look at the elemental factors. And the elemental factors are, does it satisfy my hunger or my thirst? And therefore it doesn't combine. Whereas the elemental factors of Tumah are the same spiritual problem with both of these items. And thus, they can combine. Okay. The Gemara concludes before the Mishnah with basically a repetition of what we just said, but in the name of other people. Earlier was Rav Chisda speaking, and now V'chenim Reish Lakish, the same thing is true. The same thing is said in Reish Lakish, where Reish Lakish said Machlekes Shnuya. The question of our Mishnah is a matter of dispute. But Rabbi Shua, and our Mishnah follows Rabbi Shua. The Tanan, as we say, Klal Amar Rabbi Shua, etc. Going on to say that Rabbi Shua says that matters do not combine if they don't share both culpability and size factor. And in the case of Yom Kippur, culpability is equal, but size factor is not equal between food and drink. And therefore, Reish Lakish said, just like Rav Chisda, that our Mishnah is only Rabbi Shua. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan is the same as Rav Nachman, even though Rav Nachman and Rav Chisda come way after Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. But the Gemara first quotes the latter scholars and then goes back to quoting the earlier scholars. Where Rabbi Yochanan is in line with Rav Nachman's view, which is, even the sages might agree that on Yom Kippur we do not combine, because Adkan like Amri Rabbanan, Hasan, the sages only said that they are in favor of combination there, El Inyan Tuman, exclusively in a matter of Tumah, where, at least on the elemental level, the two things share the same spiritual problem, even if they don't share the same size, because they both confer the same impurity. Avalacha, but in our situation, when we're talking about a Mishum Yusuvi Daita, we're talking about whether or not this Mishum Yusuvi Daitahu, where here we're talking about whether or not my pain is set at ease, then Vahai and combining food and drink, like a Mesiv Daita, does not settle the mind, because my thirst is one issue and my hunger is a separate issue. So the same dispute between Rav Chisda and Rav Nachman took place earlier between Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish as to whether or not our Mishnah is exclusively Rabbi Shua, or can our Mishnah follow even the sages who disagree with Rabbi Shua, because impurity and Yom Kippur are of a different nature. Okay, so this concludes essentially our discussion on the amount of food required for culpability and the combinations of food and drink, and the combinations of food and food, and drink. So at this point, I think tomorrow we can get to the Shulchan Aruch, the Halacha, even though the next section of the Gemara talks about the punishments. And I don't know that there's a section of the Shulchan Aruch that talks about the punishments. I don't think there is. But anyway, I think tomorrow we're going to look at the Shulchan Aruch, the chapter that discusses this issue, and then we'll go forward. And when we get to the issue of what children are allowed to eat and drink, we'll look at the Shulchan Aruch for that. And then we'll look at the Shulchan Aruch for sick people, etc., as we learn them, as we've done in the past already. A wonderful day, everybody.